Good morning, everyone. This is Doug. This is a continuation of episode 28A. This is 28B of Famous Quotes on Paul. 28A was about Aaron Abke, who was a pastor at age 23, full-time, and he came to this realization about Paul being not from Christ, and he turned around and he's been following Christ since then, as he says in his video that I showed you. Now, some people have pointed out that he uses language that sounds kind of mystical and maybe from the Eastern religion type sources. Now, could that be that he's simply trying to reach out to those people using their language? So that's a question mark I have. I'm still not resolved about it, but I want to caution us, and I want to show us there's a good Bible lesson that he does teach that I think we should look at, and I'll discuss it with you in a second. But I want to warn us that, Jesus gave a clear message. It doesn't mean you can't, but this message I'm going to quote doesn't mean you can't ever judge or condemn something, but it clearly means you cannot do it if you wouldn't want to be judged the same way. So if you're going to use specious speculation and guesswork just because of how something is worded that where this person's heart is coming from, that's not a good way to do it. Okay, you have to test all the things that they say, and then if they say what you think they say, then prove it. But don't judge them just by supercilious or insubstantial analysis. That's not the way you want to be judged, then don't do it to somebody else. So be fair and kind to the other person. That's what you should do, is Jesus' message. And I just want to say, anything I put in my famous quotes on Paul don't mean never has meant I agree with the persons I'm profiling. I'm just telling you they have quotes that are just fair analysis. I mean, the Bible is not just spiritual work that we're looking at, but it's also a written work that anybody can read and anybody can interpret. And so we find it interesting how various people, even if I don't agree with them, see it. So I'll have people who are very pro-Paul, who unintentionally prove that the Clementine literature, for example, was written before the Gospels. So in other words, the very first thing written was the Clementine homilies, not the Gospels, according to his analysis. Now, that's very damaging to Paul, but he doesn't put two and two together because this is a very anti-Paul literature in the earliest church. And so he's admitting it's the first view of the church that was ever documented in writing. Just so you know how my mind works, is he didn't mean to help me, but he did. Number 23, famous quotes on Paul, George Reber, faith alone, and he was faith alone and pro-Paul person. But he says things, again, which unintentionally served to undermine Paul. So I don't mind using people who are not Christians in the sense that follow Christ, are totally dominated by wanting to just have everyone follow Paul. If they say something that's very helpful to getting people back to Christ, I'll quote it. And that's what this whole series, Famous Quotes on Paul, are about. I'll show you one more. Now, Robert Eisenman, fantastic discoverer of the Dead Sea Scrolls about the Habakkuk Pesher, and several other writings. And he's said, hey, these all say they're written by the Ebion, the poor. This was a group in the early church that was actually associated or identified as the original apostolic church. And guess what? I can prove it, he said. And in there, you can see the Zadik, the righteous one, is battling the spouter of lies, which is a guy who fits Paul to the T. And they're battling in the Habakkuk Pesher commentary in the Dead Sea Scrolls, dated to 50 AD by the paleographers, independent of Mr. Eisenman. They date it 50 AD, and they're battling between the Zadik, who's saying, the passage of Habakkuk 2, verse 4 does not say spouter of lies, you're wrong, spouter of lies, that it says the just shall live by his faith. No, it says the just shall live by his emunah in Hebrew, which means steadfastness, their steadfast love of God and obedience to him. That's what it means. That's what emunah means in Hebrew. And so that's the confrontation between the spouter of lies and the Zadik. And then just in context, as you know, is the Messiah has already come, he's died, and he'll be coming back. So this is not, so the obviousness that this was a Christian sect was why for 40 plus years the Christian church kept this suppressed and only allowed Catholic scholars that they designated to look at it, because it's very embarrassing to have Paul, upon which the Roman Catholic Church is founded. Basically, if you look at all their doctrines, it's very anti-law. Just go look at the Council of Laodicea. Anybody who keeps Sabbath is cursed, accursed, anathema. That was the Catholic position as of 363 of how the Sabbath, just keeping the Sabbath instead of the day of the sun, the God of the sun's day, that Constantine wanted, if you don't do the day of the sun, you're cursed. You have to do that. And if you keep Sabbath, you're cursed. Anyway, so again, when you're over here in the famous quotes on Paul, I don't agree with everything Eisman says. He doesn't believe in Jesus, although, by the way, he very much admires Jesus. In fact, what he says is, if I were a follower of Jesus, so he's saying, I'm not a follower of Jesus, but he said, if I was a follower of Jesus, I would expect every Christian who would see that Paul contradicts Jesus would stand up and yell and scream and say, we have to go a different way. We have to go with Jesus. So this is the funny thing, is like, he's not confessing Christ, but he obviously admires Jesus. And he's saying, everybody should realize that if you really loved Christ, why would you let this guy do this to Jesus? So he's a very interesting fellow. But I'm not including it because I agree with everything he says. He's got books that are 1,000 pages long. I'm not going to have a lifetime to read some of these books, so you cannot jump to conclusions about that regarding why this person is on the channel. It's rather he is teaching us something that we need to know about the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the discovery of the writing of the original apostolic church is right there, and we can see the names of the figures are right there. James the Just, James the Zadik in Hebrew, this key figure in the Habakkuk Pesher, who's battling the spouter of lies, is the same moniker, the same nickname that James the Just had. That's why the word just is in Hebrew, Zadik. And that's what's going on. Anyway, let me continue. All right, so now I'm going to review some of Aaron's statements about the law of one, which he says is his central doctrine. So I examined it, and I want you to understand at least where he's coming from. What have I said? Whenever you want to criticize an opposing argument, you want to judge him, then you have to understand the spiritual and scriptural basis upon which he's basing what he's saying. And then tell me how wrong he really is if you think he's wrong. And what my job is to give you the closest understanding to what I think he's saying, and then you can judge him if you wish. Okay, but you want to be judged by the same thing by having been given a fair hearing. And when it's all over, I'm going to play a couple of clips from Casablanca to prove my point about what I see in what he's saying and what I think God's word teaches us. So I know, how can Casablanca teach us about God's word? Well, you'll see. And I'm going to share with you my experience as being a lawyer with entertainment writers in Hollywood, the top guys, and the truth of how they write to deal with the nature of human spirit and how they try to work with the spirit that wants good things to happen, not bad. Okay, so keep that in mind. So here we go. Okay, so Aaron, I'll say Aaron, but I think it's Aaron in Hebrew. Aaron refers to the law of one as a central message of Jesus from Mark 12, verse 20 to 31. And what Aaron is saying, if God's image is in all humans, loving your neighbor is an extension of loving God. And I'll explain that in a minute. So let's read what Jesus says, though, first. Mark 12, verse 28 to 31. And one of the scribes came, and having heard them reasoning together, and perceiving that he had answered them well, asked him, which is the first commandment of all? I'm going to pause there. So now the person is asking only for one commandment. And what is that top commandment? Now, Jesus is going to give him two commands, but he also refers to it as a singular command. And that's what I think is Aaron's point. And so I hadn't seen that before, and I hadn't paid attention to. So down here, Jesus is going to refer to it in verse 31 as a commandment. There is none other commandment greater than these. So there's no other commandment greater than these two commandments. But Jesus actually could have said there's no other commandments greater than these two. But he said there is no other commandment singular than these two, which suggests that he's saying this commandment is singular. And so we'll just bear with me, though. Let's keep going. Which is the first commandment of all? Verse 29, and Jesus answered him, the first of all the commandments is, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Yahweh. So just so you know, the Christian scholars had the same contamination after the 200 AD period. And this is probably why there's no manuscripts that have survived from most Bibles from the time period prior to this Christian scribes adopting the Jewish tradition of getting rid of God's name, Yahweh, and replacing it with some other word. And now they use the word Hashem in most Jewish Bibles. So Hashem means the name. We, on the other hand, put in the word Adonai, and we've changed the Bible 6,825 times in the Law and the Prophets to remove Yahweh's name and replace it with the name Adonai or some similar word in Hebrew if we're transliterating it, or we'll just in Greek, just use Greek to English, or excuse me, English translation, we'll just say Lord. So that's a crime against Deuteronomy 4:2. You're not allowed to add, subtract and add a word, not once, not and therefore not 6,823 times. Anyway, the point is that I'm going to put it here so you can see where it was. Professor Howard says this is exactly what he found in the earliest manuscripts of the Shem Tov. They had the word Yahweh. Verse 30, and thou shalt love Yahweh your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. And this is the first commandment, first. And the second is like. Now, why? What? That's the thing I want you to focus on. Why is it like it? Why is Jesus linking these two together? And what, again, Aaron is saying it's the law of one. These two commandments are linked by Jesus. And right here, I think the word like is where Jesus is linking them, as they're pointing at the same thing. Namely this, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Then Jesus says there is none other commandment, singular, greater than these. So these two stand above any single command. But the way Jesus is talking about is like the first and the second are like each other. Of course, one has priority over the other, but maybe they're really related. And I think that's what Aaron is suggesting, is they're connected somehow. So let's examine, is loving your neighbor related to loving God? In other words, if God's spirit or nature is in each person, the Bible talks of us being the image of God, and I'll get into that next. If that means that, then loving your neighbor is loving that aspect of the other person to draw out their good nature and help them on their path to following God, right? Because if you emphasize their good side and love is going to bring out good, not bad, that you are helping in that other person's walk in this world. This is the kind of concept that does make sense. So let's take a look at the verse. And let me ask this question. Is God in each person on earth as a context for explaining the command, love thy neighbor as thyself? So if God is in each person in some form, like an image, we'll go read that verse here, and the interpretations of this next, is then loving your neighbor is another way of loving God, because God has a spiritual image inside that person that is you can draw out and be in love with, because it's a good side, it's a good way of behaving, it's a good nature that you can resonate with, okay? You can get along with. Let's use words like that. All right, so let's listen to Genesis 1:27. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. All right, so now we have to ask, what is this image? Is it a physical being? Or do we have something in common? God have eyes and hands like us and so on? So Blue Letter Bible, I'm just going to give you this standard Protestant summary of biblical concepts, and they're clear, and I agree with them. God has no physical body, all right? The Bible teaches that God is spirit. We'll go and show that to you in a minute. By the way, this is Don Stewart's article, Does God Have a Physical Body? A spirit, by definition, is invisible. It does not have any physical form. God, therefore, has no physical form. This is one of the reasons that the Lord, Yahweh, did not allow idols of him to be made. How God can exist as a spirit without any sort of body is a divine mystery. No, it isn't. It's just that's the way God is. That's his nature. But he has power and force. You can see the effects of it in this world. Now, let me show you what Jesus says in John 4, verse 24. God is spirit. Doesn't say he's a spirit with a body, right? He's a spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. Another clue that God is a spirit. And therefore, when we're made in the image of God, we must have a spirit as well. And that spirit is a reflection of God. I want to read you an article from the Gospel Coalition, a conservative Christian Protestant group. Moreover, a man alone among creatures worships God with spiritual awareness. As Solomon observed, God, quote, has put eternity into man's heart, Ecclesiastes 3, verse 11. And what does that mean? Well, I would say generally it means we fear death. We fear the unknown about death. We fear punishment in death. We would rather continue living. We're enjoying living. We enjoy life. And we enjoy being with people, and we enjoy loving others, and so on and so forth. There's lots to be said for living, but some people want to kill themselves. So I just don't want to say it's a universal principle at all times, but usually a crisis or something bad has to happen to to a person to want them to want to be killed or kill themselves. Then it goes on. With the ability of a nature that reflects the divine image with the ability of a nature that reflects the divine image comes the responsibility to fulfill our chief end as God's creature, quote, to glorify God and enjoy him forever. Well, the primary thing that God says to us is your primary obligation is to love your neighbors yourself and love God as your most primary act of obedience. And so this is I don't know why the Gospel Coalition doesn't include that, but I would include that. Is God's image or spirit nature in each person on earth? Let's take a look at the same thing. This is the same article. Man is the image of God from the Gospel Coalition by Richard Phillips. Central to the Bible's teaching about mankind is the statement of Genesis 1:27. God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. And it's also mentioned again in 1:26. Genesis 1:26 recorded God's will for the human race. Quote, let us make man in our image after our likeness. Both image and likeness speak of resemblance. The word for image in Hebrew is salem, and it has the meaning of something that is carved or cut out. So something about God's nature has been carved out and embedded in you and me. That has to be the desire to do good and love others. Don't you think? God is merciful. That is his primary trait. He is a forgiving God. He gets angry at sin and he wants to condemn it and punish it. Yes, because that's the only way to show love actually to the person who's sinning and try to get them off and away from their evil deeds, because the only way you God Yahweh, being a holy being, to accept people into your holy kingdom is they have to be have a level of holiness acceptable to God. So this Gospel Coalition had another comment about the Bible. God is spirit, and as such, he doesn't have a body. Luke 24, verse 39. A spirit does not have flesh and bone. When the Bible speaks of our being made in his image, then it doesn't mean we're like him physically. It means that, like God, we possess a spiritual aspect to our being. Like God, we can truly know, will, and love. And I think that's minimizing God's nature to being able to know, will, and love. His nature, his spiritual nature is I would say his primary nature is his love, his mercy, his ability to do good, his desire to do good, his desire to punish evil. Okay, those I think are consistent with each other, contrary to some people believe God can't have any judgment, which is wrong. That's a loving act to reprove you and put you back on the right track. Here's an article called "Does God Have a Body Like Ours?" The phrase "image of God" does not mean that God is in human form, but rather that humans are in the image of God in their moral, spiritual, and intellectual nature. Good. There. That's a better, fuller statement. So now I want to share with you my personal experiences as a lawyer to some of the top movie writers and script writers in Hollywood, and what they taught me about how to use the human nature to write movies that are successful. And they would explain to me over and over again and teach me new stuff every week. I would come to the weekly get-togethers. We'd watch a movie. There was a little movie theater in the guy's house, this head writer, and there were about 20 seats in a little theater, and you'd feel the vibration of the speakers on the floor. It had all kinds of gimmicky things that were fun. But most importantly, I learned how to write. I learned from these guys the secrets of writing in Hollywood. So I'm going to share with you some of their secrets, not all of their secrets. I don't have enough time to do that. But this movie was one of the examples they used with me, and so I'm going to use it with you. This is a movie about a man who says, I don't care about anyone else but myself. I'm out for myself, and his name is Rick. He runs a cafe in Casablanca in the middle of World War II. And a gentleman is a leader of the underground in Europe, and that's the husband of Ingrid Bergman. And so what ends up happening is Ingrid Bergman thinks that her husband has died, and she has a love affair with Humphrey Bogart in Paris when they're both in Paris at the same time. Now, but Bogart doesn't know why she breaks it off while they're in Paris. She doesn't show up for a meeting to go with him back to where they were going to go. And what ends up happening is he has a broken heart. So now when he goes to Casablanca, he's bitter. He doesn't care about any woman. He doesn't trust any woman. He doesn't want to do anything but just wallow in his self-pity and he doesn't care about the Nazi situation. But while that's all happening, is the French prefect under the Nazi tolerated government, what's called the Vichy government of that was ruling over Casablanca, a French colony. They're looking for these letters of transit to get people out of the country of the city state, if you will, of Casablanca. And Rick knows where these letters of transit are, and they need no counter signature. So they're like coming from the top brass of the Nazi party, and so their signatures are gold, and they don't need a double countersign. So these people would pay a fortune for these kind of tickets to get out of there. And there's a plane comes every once in a while to Casablanca and departs. And so all of this is going to be set up that there's a flight out and somebody can take it. There's 2 tickets. And who's going to be in the plane? Is it going to be Ingrid Bergman and Rick, which is what Ingrid Bergman thinks is going to end up happening? Or is it going to be the husband of Ingrid Bergman and Ingrid Bergman? They were the married couple, but she's willing now to go over to Rick. Now, what you got to know is, how do you have a character arc? How does a character arc? You have to have what's called the angel character. And in this movie, the angel character is Ingrid Bergman, because she's going to appeal in a final scene towards the very end to his better nature, to not just think of himself, but put the good of others, which she herself is admitted to her Rick is, I love you. I just loved my husband because he was a hero in the underground, but I was a little girl and I really didn't understand what's going on. And so she's confessing, I loved him in a fatherly way, in a admiring way, but I didn't really love him in the way that I love you, Rick. So he's, wow, what a guy, what a wonderful thing to find this out. But she says to him later, she's willing to go with her actual husband, this guy. And why is she willing to do that? For the good of the cause. She thinks the cause that he's fighting is more important than her own self. So that is what she tells Rick. And I'm going to show you the scenes. They're very short scenes, but I wanted you to know the setup. And therefore, she's the angel character to his good nature, even though he's literally suppressed his good nature almost throughout the whole movie. But there are little glimpses of it here and there. He helps some couple at the gambling table. It's a fun scene. A lot of stuff going on. He's growing in his character arc, but his full character arc never happens till the very last scene. So I'm going to play you where she appeals to his better nature, and he doesn't care one iota. He only wants to think of himself. And then you'll see how he changes in the final scene. So they're very short clips. I hope you'll enjoy them, and then I'll come back and I'll make a little more comment.
How did you get in?
The stairs from the street.
I told you this morning you'd come around, but this is a little ahead of schedule. Well, won't you sit down?
Richard, I had to see you.
There's Richard again. We're back in Paris.
Please.
Your unexpected visit isn't connected by any chance with the letters of transit. Seems as long as I have those letters, I'll never be lonely.
You can ask any price you want, but you must give me those letters.
I went all through that with your husband. It's no deal.
Well, I know how you feel about me, but I'm asking you to put your feelings aside for something more important.
Do I have to hear again what a great man your husband is, what an important cause he's fighting for?
It was your cause, too. In your own way, you were fighting for the same thing.
I'm not fighting for anything anymore except myself. I'm the only cause I'm interested in.
So pay attention to what just happened there. The woman is telling him, you used to believe in this cause. So as a young man, he was fighting for the against Franco and the fascists in Spain. So she's saying, you once had the same feeling against these people. It's a good cause. Fight for the good cause. And he doesn't want to do it. No, I'm only out for myself now. I'm going to use these letters in transit. I'm going to get out of here. I don't care about anybody but me. So where is he? He's in it's called the dark night of the soul. So if you ask these writers, what is this? It's called the dark night of the soul. So the soul has reached bottom. And now someone is the angel character telling him, look to do something sacrificial for someone else. He knows that she really loves him and did love him, but now she's willing to stay with her husband and wants the letters of transit so she can leave with him on that plane that's going to leave the next day. And so she is the character arc. She's the angel, what these guys would tell me, she's the angel character who appeals to his better nature. At the moment he hears it, he doesn't want to accept it. But what's going on? See, these writers, even though they're not Christians or believers or anything like that, they understand there's a thing about human nature that if you give it a conflict between good and evil, and it's stark as it can't be more stark than this. So we're talking about the National Socialist Party of Hitler. Okay, we're talking about people who are evil. Okay, and they are the enemy that he doesn't want to fight anymore. He doesn't want to think about anybody but himself. And she's saying, think of a higher cause, think of a higher purpose. Don't just be selfish. Now, let me just add a summary of a scene just before the one you're going to see. And the night before, he and Elsa get together and they decide they're going to get on the plane together and fly off. And that's going to be the end of the movie. They're going to fulfill their love. So this idea that they're both in love is now the justification for throwing the husband to the side and not caring about him. But what you need to know is this film originally had that as the actual ending of the movie. You'll see that's not how it ends. And this was aired to a group of people in a theater in Burbank. And it's a very famous history of movies. And the people were revulsed at it. They loved the movie until the ending. Like, how can you have the husband who's fighting the Nazis go off, be left behind to suffer a death back here in Casablanca, and his wife and this guy running off with her are on the plane. So they rewrote the ending to what you're now going to see, and you see even the audience knew what human nature wanted. And so this was a B movie, by the way, so you didn't have the best writers, so they weren't really maybe as talented as you think they were. The audience had more common sense of how this movie had to end, and that's what I thought was so funny is human nature overcame. These guys told me the whole story. They said human nature would not accept the way this was written at the end. And so something about human nature, even those people don't believe in God maybe or don't talk about God, but they knew that human nature has a desire that good wins. Okay, so let's watch now how the revised version finally ends, and I think you'll find it much happier than what I just told you was the original ending.
If you don't mind, you fill in the names. That'll make it even more official.
You think of everything, don't you?
And the names are Mr. and Mrs. Victor Laszlo.
But why my name, Richard?
Because you're getting on that plane.
I don't understand. What about you?
I'm staying here with him till the plane gets safely away.
No, Richard, no. What has happened to you last night?
Last night we said a great many things. You said I was to do the thinking for both of us. Well, I've done a lot of it since then. It all adds up to one thing. You're getting on that plane with Victor where you belong.
But, Richard, no,
Now, you've got to listen to me. You have any idea what you'd have to look forward to if you stayed here? 9 chances out of 10, we'd both wind up at a concentration camp. Isn't that true, Louis?
I'm afraid Major Strasser would insist.
You're saying this only to make me go.
I'm saying it because it's true. Inside of us, we both know you belong with Victor. You're part of his work, the thing that keeps him going. If that plane leaves the ground and you're not with him, you'll regret it. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon and for the rest of your life.
But what about us?
We'll always have Paris. We didn't have. We lost it until you came to Casablanca. We got it back last night.
When I said I would never leave you.
And you never will. But I've got a job to do, too. Where I'm going, you can't follow. What I've got to do, you can't be any part of. Ilse, I'm no good at being noble, but it doesn't take much to see that the problems of 3 little people don't amount to a hill of beans in this crazy world. Someday you'll understand that. Now. He's looking at you, kid.
So Aaron's reference to the law of one is a decent way or a reasonable way of referring to the fact that Jesus says the first commandment and the second is like it. These are connected into a single principle by Jesus. So they're connected, they're related. And when you see that people are in the movies you watch, even if they're not about God directly, there's something when you're watching it, you feeling like, what would God be saying if he gets on that plane with her and leaves the husband behind to die to the Nazis or coming and rushing to the airport to kill Rick if they could catch him. So you definitely resonate with, and by the way, they threw out all that old films, and can you imagine if that still existed? Is you want to see a moral ending, not just a happy ending. The happiest ending would have been what they wrote originally, thinking of human happiness first and foremost over the happiness of the human race, the entire human race was confronted with an evil, which was the Nazi movement. I mean, 20 million Russians had already died fighting this war, and so on. And we've seen millions of Jews later. We could see them in the death camps when we saw the original, we saw the actual handwriting of all the names and numbers. The Germans were so meticulous, they wrote out all the names of the people they killed. So we know exactly how many people they killed, and we know who their names were, except, the people were thrown into pits and so on and so forth. But anyway, the point is the law of one is not an unreasonable way to refer to it. Now, would I refer to it that way? I've never done that before. I never thought about it, but I also never put the connection between the two. I never saw the second is like it. That means these are both like each other. They reflect the same thing. Love God, love your neighbor. They're reflecting the same thing. So is Aaron wrong that when you love your neighbor, you're also loving God? Not that God, that neighbor is God, but the spirit of God, the image of God in them. There's something good in all people, and you try to find it, try to bring it out. You try to love that part of that person and bring them out. Therefore, there is a nature in us, inherently in everybody, even people who don't think they know anything about God. They know that movie makes them cry when they get to that point. The self-sacrifice of Rick is tears at your heart that he knows he's going to be killed. I won't tell you how it really ends, but that's what he thinks at this moment where he's doing this. He will be dead within minutes, but he's going to put her on the plane, and she knows he's going to be dead in minutes, or she thinks everybody thinks he's going to die, and he's giving himself up for her. That's really the beautiful thing at the end here, and that's what people want to see. And if you didn't have that ending, you were revulsed, and these people literally demanded change the end of the movie. The people who watch it at Burbank. All right. So anyway, I hope that helps explain that what Jesus is talking about makes sense in the way it's interpreted by Aaron. It's a sort of an image or reflection of God, back at God, of the same image that he has in his nature for goodness and love. He put in us a smaller image, a different image, in the sense that it's not, we're not many gods. Nobody's saying we're many gods, but we have that same sense of good, right and wrong. It's intuitively written on our hearts, and so that is what is the law of one. And loving your neighbor is, in a sense, loving God, whose spirit, whose image dwells in that other person. I can see that. Now, here's the thing, though, that about myself, my personally saying, would I ever try to reach out to any of you and start talking about the law of one? The answer is no, because you and I are all from a Protestant. I'm just feeling that most of us are from a Protestant normative background. We've never heard the law of one. It sounds like it's something new. But what I think that means we should see if we can respect what Aaron's doing, pray for him to be truly following Jesus, words only, and that he is using what he's learned to bring and unite young people in a way that a fuddy-duddy like me, I'm 67, right? I'm nowhere close to the 23-year-olds and how to relate to them and what kind of words to relate to. Maybe kids like these kind of expressions. So I cannot judge him at the moment as transgressing any barrier lines when he's talking about the primary commandments that Jesus said to follow and obey in the big picture of things, seeing things in this bigger light. And I think that he even used the term, taking a look at it from a perspective out of heaven. This is what God is looking down on us. There are other subsidiary commands to this, obviously, but these are the primary ones that if we follow these, we make this our mission every morning, every day, to love God with our whole heart, mind, and soul, and love our neighbor as ourselves. If that's all you had time to pray for, to me, what he's saying is Jesus would be pleased by that. You don't have a half hour when you're trying to rush to get to work. But if you could pray the prayer, Lord, help me to love Yahweh with all of my heart, mind, and soul, and let me love my neighbor as myself today. I mean, I've never thought of praying just those two commandments every day, but maybe I'm going to start doing that. I'm just showing you how you can adapt to what he's saying that would be helpful. But at the same time, it doesn't throw out any other law. He even says, Aaron, in the episode I gave you, that not one jot or tittle will go out of the law. So he's telling you there's no minimization of the law by virtue of saying these are the two primary commands and keep these in your mind at all times. But it does refocus us each day by keeping our eye on the ball, which is loving God, loving our neighbor. And it sure you could say that's watering the gospel down. No, it isn't. It's actually the gospel. Loving God, loving your neighbor is the gospel of Jesus Christ if you study and read everything. So we are following Jesus' words only. These are the two top commands, and one is like the other, and that's what Aaron pulled out. And I would say he's helped me see something I didn't see in the verse before. I hope it helps you see something in the verse. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But you still believe in these verses, right? So that's all it is. And he doesn't teach anything contrary to these verses that they're not valid. He's teaching this is the core of what he is teaching. That's what he claims. He claims these two principles is the core of what he teaches. And he emphasizes in the video I gave you that Jesus didn't abolish any other laws, okay? Didn't abolish any laws at all, okay? Every jot or tittle stays there until the heavens and earth pass away. Okay, all right, so I hope that helps us give a better perspective on him. We also have to remember that let's say he looks like a Christian, talks like a Christian, but he weren't really a Christian. Then Jesus says you have to leave the tares alone. Leave it for the angels for the end of time to make the decision. But love him, love everybody. That's what Jesus said. That's the parable of the wheat and the tares. So that if the seeds are sown and they grow up, some are tares, that means they're bad. They look like wheat, but they're just weeds. And the other are the actual wheat. Jesus gives a command. Don't try to tear out the tares. Leave them alone. Don't judge them. Don't condemn them in the sense of exclude them from your company or be rude to them or say evil things towards them or hate on them. No, love him as well. It just doesn't mean you have to agree with everything he says. All right, everyone, that's the end of this episode. I just want to recommend anyone who hasn't seen the movie Casablanca to do so. It definitely shows, even from hardcore screenwriters from Hollywood, they know what makes us tick. They know that God's spirit his image is in us, and that they play on that, and that's how they make their money. And if they didn't have that bank, they didn't know that's what it makes us all tick and makes us happy to see the good conquer over evil, then they wouldn't be able to make money on a regular basis. It wouldn't be reliable. They wouldn't know if the movie would be a hit or not. And actually, the funny thing is, the people mistook how to end this movie. They thought, oh, we can make an immoral thing where the husband and wife are split up by a guy coming in between them, and that's an okay ending. That's the Hollywood writers maybe had that weird morality, but it wouldn't sit with the audience, and so the audience dictated the outcome that you see today. And that's just a great example of God's image reflecting in the people who watched that movie in the movie theater in Burbank back in the 1940s. All right, God bless everybody. Take care. Ciao. Bye.